Waterproof. Why did a flash from Hourglass Lake cross my consciousness? I too had known it, without knowing it all along. There was no shock, no surprise. Quietly the fusion took place, and everything fell into order, into the pattern of branches that I have woven throughout this memoir with the express purpose of having the ripe fruit fall at the right moment. Yes, with the express and perverse purpose of rendering. She was talking, but I sat melting in my golden peace, of rendering that golden and monstrous peace through the satisfaction of logical recognition, which my most inimical reader should experience now. She was, as I say, talking. It came now in a relaxed flow. He was the only man she had ever been crazy about. What about Dick? Oh, Dick was a lamb. They were quite happy together, but she meant something different. And I had never counted, of course. She considered me as if grasping all at once the incredible and somehow tedious, confusing and unnecessary fact that the distant, elegant, slender, 40-year-old valetudinarian in velvet coat sitting beside her had known and adored every pore and follicle of her pubescent body. In her washed-out grey eyes, strangely spectacled, our poor romance was for a moment reflected, pondered upon, and dismissed like a dull party, like a rainy picnic to which only the dullest bores had come, like a humdrum exercise, like a bit of dry mud caking her childhood. I just managed to jerk my knee out of the range of a sketchy tap, one of her acquired gestures. She asked me not to be dense. The past was the past. I had been a good father, she guessed, granting me that. Proceed, Dolly Schiller. Well, did I know that he had known her mother, that he was practically an old friend, that he had visited with his uncle in Ramsdale, years ago, and spoken at Mother's Club, and had tugged and pulled her, Dolly, by her bare arm onto his lap in front of everybody, and kissed her face, she was 10, and furious with him? Did I know he had seen me and her at the inn where he was writing the very play she was to rehearse in Beardsley 2 years later? Did I know it had been horrid of her to sidetrack me into believing that Claire was an old female, maybe a relative of his or a sometime life-mate, and oh, what a close shave it had been when the Waste Journal carried his picture. The Bryceland Gazette had not. Yes, very amusing. Yes, she said, this world was just one gag after another. If somebody wrote up her life, nobody would ever believe it. At this point there came brisk, homey sounds from the kitchen into which Dick and Bill had lumbered in quest of beer. Through the doorway they noticed the visitor, and Dick entered the parlour. "Dick, this is my dad," cried Dolly in a resounding, violent voice that struck me as totally strange, and new and cheerful, and old and sad, because the young fellow, veteran of a remote war, was hard of hearing. Arctic blue eyes, black hair, ruddy cheeks, unshaven chin. We shook hands. Discreet Bill, who evidently took pride in working wonders with one hand, brought in the beer cans he had opened, wanted to withdraw. The exquisite courtesy of simple folks was made to stay. A beer ad. In point of fact, I preferred it that way, and so did the Schillers. I switched to the jittery rocker. Avidly munching, Dolly plied me with marshmallows and potato chips. The men looked at her fragile, frileux, diminutive, old-world, youngish but sickly father in velvet coat and beige vest, maybe a viscount. They were under the impression I had come to stay, and Dick, with a great wrinkling of brows that denoted difficult thought, suggested Dolly and he might sleep in the kitchen on a spare mattress. I waved a light hand and told Dolly, who transmitted it by means of a special shout to Dick, that I had merely dropped in on my way to Reedsburg, where I was to be entertained by some friends and admirers. It was then noticed that one of the few thumbs remaining to Bill was bleeding. Not such a wonder-worker after all. How womanish and somehow never seen that way before was the shadowy division between her pale breasts when she bent down over the man's hand. She took him for repairs to the kitchen. For a few minutes, 3 or 4 little eternities which positively welled with artificial warmth, Dick and I remained alone. He sat on a hard chair, rubbing his forelimbs and frowning. I had an idle urge to squeeze out the blackheads on the wings of his perspiring nose with my long agate claws. He had nice, sad eyes with beautiful lashes and very white teeth. His Adam's apple was large and hairy. Why don't they shave better, these young, brawny chaps? He and his dolly had had unrestrained intercourse on that couch there at least 180 times, probably much more. And before that, how long had she known him? No grudge, funny, no grudge at all. Nothing except grief and nausea. He was now rubbing his nose. I was sure that when finally he would open his mouth, he would say, slightly shaking his head, "Oh, she's a swell kid, Mr. Hayes, she sure is, and she's going to make a swell mother." He opened his mouth and took a sip of beer. This gave him countenance, and he went on sipping till he frothed at the mouth. He was a lamb. He had cupped her Florentine breasts. His fingernails were black and broken, but the phalanges, the whole carpus, the strong, shapely wrist were far, far finer than mine. I have hurt too much, too many bodies with my twisted poor hands to be proud of them. French epithets, a Dorset yokel's knuckles, an Austrian tailor's flat fingertips. That's Humbert Humbert.